Just waiting for one or two more people who are logging in. I'm Teri Cohan Link, principal of LINKCO. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. There are people joining us from all over the world. I'm so excited to welcome you and thank you for attending the webinar, Non-Obvious Cybersecurity Privacy Risks. Are you ready? With Shanea Leven, CEO of CodeC, whom I'll introduce in a few moments. This is the inaugural 2021 webinar in a series born out of insights shared by conversations with business leaders about the current and dynamically shifting COVID-19 business climate. The conversations resulted in a white paper entitled Resilient Realism, which LINKCO recently published. This is our way of giving back and sharing relevant information we learn speaking with business leaders on a day-to-day basis as part of our ongoing executive search practice. The summary of the white paper is on the LINKCO website. In the wake of COVID-19, many of the respondents have been grappling with changing economics related to their assets, products, and services, remote workforces, new challenges of workflow and timetables, particularly now with the current wave of COVID-19, how to evaluate risk, work product, best practices to reassure clients and protect employees, protect assets, protect IP, and keep everyone safe, cybersecurity and privacy from offsite locations, how to lead remotely with loved ones sharing workspace, and unanticipated demands on normal work time, the changing office environment, environmental impacts of the pandemic, to note but a few of the insights, disruptors, and challenges discussed in the white paper. Today's webinar focuses on non-obvious business risks. What are the cybersecurity, privacy, and business risks if you don't have control over your code? Housekeeping. Some of you have kindly shared your questions beforehand, and we already have a number in the queue. You may also send questions and comments in the Q&A box, and if not covered already, Shanea will attempt to find time to answer them during the webinar. Shanea is founder and CEO of CodeC, and for the last decade, she has been a product leader in development tools at some of the top developer-facing companies in the world, including Google, Docker, Cloudflare, and was most recently VP of product at a developer-focused startup called Lob. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now let me transfer the presentation over to Shanea. Give me a second, and we will continue. Okay, there you go.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. As Teri said, I'm Shanea. I'm going to quickly share my screen and start the presentation. Thank you so much for joining me today. Can everyone see this okay? Just let me know. Yes, perfect. Awesome. So as Teri said, my name is Shanea. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called CodeC, and we help developers to master the understanding of large-scale code bases. And today I want to talk to you just a little bit about, who am I? Why do you care? How your tools could be failing your organization, and 3 risks that are likely prevalent in your organization today. some might not be obvious as we all kind of grapple with, larger and larger code bases. And what are your options to fix them? Some may or may not be easier, some may be easier said than others. Also, every organization will have to fix it in their own unique way. So just give you some highlights of how you can think about starting to move forward. And as Teri said, for the last decade, I've been a product leader at Google and Cloudflare and Docker and a few other developer-focused startups. And most recently, I was a VP of product at Lob. They are a developer-focused API company for mail, for direct mail. And very quickly, I just want to tell you kind of a story of, my passion for coming up with CodeC and why we created it. A few years ago, I was a senior director of product at Docker, and I was about to launch a new feature. But 2 days before the launch, there was this show-stopping bug, and my engineers refused to fix the bug. Now, why would an engineer ever refuse to fix the bug 2 days before product launch? And it was because it was coming from a system that literally no one in the company understood anymore. We had some members leave the company, and this particular part of the system was coming from a very high traffic, very highly relevant part of the system for a lot of different features. And my engineering team was terrified that if they had changed something, even made a small change to it without truly deeply understanding how it worked, that they could cause catastrophic downstream effects to something else. And so after some investigation, my engineers came back and said they needed a month to understand how that system worked before they could make any changes. And there simply wasn't enough time to fix the bug. So we could have spent a month doing that investigation, or we could continue to push out features that we needed to push out for the rest of our roadmap to deliver on our yearly goals. And so we went on without that feature. And that particular engineering team, I think, was about 8 people, and it was several months of work, and it was just unlaunched. And today that feature remains unlaunched. And this happens all the time. This is not unique to, top software companies. This happens at any software company. We all know that companies need to move quickly, yet software is more complex than ever. But, why is this the case? So we've entered into a new era called big code. And big code era is, not like previous software eras. The volume, the velocity, the variety, and the value of source code has increased by multiple orders of magnitude over the last 10 years. We are dealing with 10 times as much code as we did 10 years ago. And each individual developer is handling more and more code with a lot of different variety. And the tools that were developed to manage code before 2010 are unable to scale to meet these challenges. So if you think about it, like tools like Jira and GitHub and all of these kind of multi-billion-dollar tools were designed before the big code era. Like, no one really expected them to have to deal with open source and deal with sharing code and the complexities that come with adding those things to an enterprise-sized code base.
Before you go on, I have a question.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Can you talk more about open source dependencies and how that can be a problem, and also third-party / SaaS APIs?
Yeah, absolutely. So with open source, we've now realized that it's a whole new part of our development process. But we don't have necessarily an ability to know when we integrated an open source code base into our enterprise code, how that is being maintained, how it was being maintained, if it continues to be maintained, and who's maintaining it, and does it actually satisfy our needs? So unless the open source developer is funded by a company, or patrons are donating to them, they might need to go off and live their lives. And so over time, what we found is that sometimes you need to rip something out, sometimes you need to find a new open source code base, or you need to just end up building it yourself. And that discovery process of having that open source library in your code base sometimes can get lost on your developers, because your developers are maintaining your own proprietary code and not necessarily maintaining the open source software. And so it can get out of hand really quickly, particularly if you have a lot of attrition at your company. And when I mean a lot of attrition, I mean more than the standard turnover of an engineer, which I believe is between 12 to 18 months. And so that can get really hairy to think about, where you have if you've integrated a lot of open source libraries, who knows how they'll be maintained, or what security vulnerabilities will remain if a package doesn't get updated, or some fixes don't get corrected in time. So those are the sort of things that enterprise companies deal with.
Thank you.
Of course. So I want to go back just a little bit to the story. Why would it take my engineers a month to fix that bug in our system in the first place? If you drill down a little bit and take a step back, understanding a system means having a complete mental model of how that system works. Now, software systems are made up of code, but that code manipulates data. And so what engineers do is they have to read the code to learn how it works. They read it one line at a time, thousands, hundreds of thousands of lines of code over and over, just to build that mental model in their heads. Then they have to imagine how the data hold the values of every variable, every database record, every network request across every line of code, hold all of that in their heads to build out a personal mental model of how your system works. And that in itself takes a lot of mental effort, and therefore a lot of time. And this time and mental complexity poses a serious risk to any business, any software business. So again, because of this complexity, it just takes a really long time for any developer to understand software, particularly any legacy code, or just something that a developer has written several years ago. They might have to, they're not looking at it every day, and they have to go back and remember how it works. So typically, developers take 3 to 6 months to ramp up or onboard to a new job. But that doesn't necessarily need to just be thinking about a new job. Same process starts all over again when they move to a new team, or even just like a new part of the code base that they've never seen before. It's the same thing. Onboarding is actually just the beginning. Code bases are constantly changing with every single pull request. And in fact, there's a few studies that says even after ramping up, developers are spending 60% of their time day to day reading and understanding code. And so needless to say, every company that has software has this problem and wastes tens of thousands of dollars per year per developer. And it depends on how many developers you have. So if you think about it, developers, they need to spend 60% of their time reading and understanding code to manage all the code that we have in our very large enterprise code bases. But we need to ship features so that our businesses are able to collect on that business value. Right? So what happens when developers don't spend the appropriate amount of time doing what's necessary, right? A big customer needed something yesterday so that sales can close that deal. Or we needed to get that new feature to define our new business line out the door. And like any humans, which developers are, we need to deliver that thing on time, so we take shortcuts, right? We don't get a chance to read all of the code and really understand how each part of the system is affected. We don't make sure that the other team doesn't get affected by the changes that we push. We don't check. It's just not enough time to do it. And so I want to get into some of the risks. This actually brings me to those three. So when you're shipping code, the first thing that probably comes to mind is there should be documentation, right? But when you're shipping so fast and you have so much mental effort that you need to put in, documentation is the first thing that gets cut, because the documentation is not actually, part of getting the product out the door, getting user feedback, iterating on it. Once you get a product out the door, and the product is out in the wild, there's likely bugs that you need to fix, etc. And so that constant churn, you don't get a chance to update your documentation so that other developers will know how the system works. And most developers aren't really great at writing documentation anyway, or as a backup, writing tests. So unless you have 100% code coverage with your tests, there's probably no way to really understand how all of the particular parts of your system work. And also, so as a fact, like the only way, if you don't have those two things, to know how your system works is simply to read the code or ask someone. And we've already established that there's too much code for any one person to read. Now, the second thing is, even if you did have the documentation, and you have, let's say, one engineering team of 5, and they're all pushing code, your code is changing faster than any one person can keep up with the documentation anyway. And so what do? You ask, that brings me kind of to your third option, which is your engineers will ask another engineer who either wrote the code or was responsible for the code, how does it work? But most companies have 1 to 2 senior engineers who are responsible for understanding how their code works. And what happens when that person leaves, right? They could leave for any number of reasons. They could leave because they need a new challenge. They could leave from cultural reasons at your company. They could leave just because we're all dealing with, the change of the world, and they might have family things. So what happens when that developer leaves your business now and you don't have anything documented? That no one knows how it works. And that in itself happens all of the time.
Before you go on, may I thank you. What type of documentation for scalability do you recommend, given the risks that you're describing here?
Yeah, so most simply, there are, in the past, there's been, you just basically write everything down. You write down how it works in words. Kind of the next step above that is to draw diagrams so people can get a high-level picture of how things work. So there's a lot of, not just UML diagrams, but there are frameworks and structures such as like the C4 method to allow people to get a greater picture of how their system works. But that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And a lot of the diagramming software that we have today only illustrates, very key boxes and lines of how a system works. And so something like the C4 method illustrates a framework for developers to illustrate your code base, taking into account how users see your system, taking into account how the actual under the hood components work, etc. And so, or you could use a new tool like something like CodeC that kind of helps you to document at a very scalable way. Or there's companies like SourceGraph who helps with your universal code search to help you kind of figure out where things are more quickly. So there are starting to be tools to help with this process, but what you need to think about is how to ensure the developer is actually updated, or have a different person, whether it's a program manager or a technical writer, have someone dedicated to ensure the documentation stays up to date.
Great. Please continue.
Awesome. So let's say that, now you know what the risks are. What are your options to fix it? So first, you could ignore it. You could fix it the hard way, or you could fix it the easy way. Now, here's the thing. Our code bases are growing and growing and growing, and it will take a lot of effort to be able to go back and understand how our code works. As I talked about before, your code is still growing every single day. So you could just ignore it. That is a valid action. And hope that you won't be one of the companies that get breached or anything like that, and you or your developers don't leave and have critical information in their heads. That is a valid thing, but it's definitely not the safest thing. You could, sorry about that. You could fix it the hard way. You could, so the biggest problem that is felt most, this is a big problem that's felt most acutely by companies building the most software. So you think about like the Googles, the Facebooks of the world. There are a few companies today that are recognizing and solving this problem internally. Like Googles and Facebooks and Amazons of the world are all building tools like this, but they're doing it in-house. And if you don't have the resources to build it in-house, then what do? So you have to remember, though, that every company today, many companies are, in fact, software companies. And what software companies are doing today, like building these tools internally, the financial services companies will be doing in 5 years, or the entire Fortune 500 will be doing that in 10 years. But for everyone else, the problem is going to continue to grow. So you could, staff up, you could come up with new structures, you could make sure that all of your developers are adhering to those policies, et cetera. And that's a valid way also to be able to fix this problem. Or you could fix it the easy way. So one company that I know is SourceGraph that can also help you with this. There are a lot of new startups that are kind of coming in this space. You could use CodeC to fix this problem. CodeC is a continuous understanding platform that helps developers to first understand how your code works, help you document and collaborate more easily. And so employing one of, whether it's CodeC or SourceGraph or any one of these other new big code era tools to kind of get you off the ground and started is likely fixing it the easy way. It will take some effort as these tools are brand new and code bases are, again, really large and complex. But this is basically the fastest way to do it that exists today. So just as a reminder, be aware that you have this problem is the first thing, and know that every single day your risk is growing. And so you should probably take this back to your organizations and figure out like how can you fix this, or how can you start to address this over the coming weeks, quarters, years to make sure that your organization is protected. And with that, thank you.
All right. I'm going to continue with my questions. Thank you very much.
No problem.
So how is CodeC helping to avoid inaccuracy, time sink, and changes in data visualizations?
Yeah, so CodeC works by visually showing how a code base works. We're the first company that will do this we visualize code at like the lowest level all the way up to the highest architectural level. And so when a developer has a question, whether they are new to a team, they're just debugging, they have there's something that they don't understand, we can help them visualize how the system works. So no matter what situation they're in, they have the information that they need on the ground. And that's the main way that we help with that time sink. A lot of code visualizations or graph visualizations are just boxes and lines and don't have the richness to be able to really show how a code base works. Because when you hook up a normal graph dependency map on an enterprise-sized code base with just boxes and lines pointing to each different point, it just ends up looking like a big mess. And it's not actually helpful. So we have, our team has a pretty good teaching background to help developers to add that teaching pedagogy to a visualization that never really existed before, to really help them quickly understand how things work. So that's how we're doing it. SourceGraph does it by really, really awesome code search. So all of those things are, helpful to make sure that developers' lives are as easy as possible.
How big of an issue is something like key woman risk in the code world?
Yeah, it's a huge risk, and your development team is no stranger to it today, right? So I assume that there are lots of companies that, over the pandemic, maybe had to let some people go. They had to really think about who knows all of the code, right? Who do we need to retain because we need to keep that knowledge in house? It's a huge risk. It happens every day that key engineer or that key developer leaves your company and takes all of that knowledge with them. And there is no onboarding or offboarding process that can get all of the intricacies out of that senior engineer's head and disseminate it to the rest of the team. Because we're humans and we forget, particularly if your engineer, that senior key woman engineer, has stayed at your company for 3, 4, 5, even 10 years. So it is a big risk because they're basically walking out the door with your entire code base, with that's your product. That's how you make money. Walking out the door with it and going to a different organization.
Wow. Fixing just seems daunting to most. How does a company even understand how big their problem is?
It really just depends, right? Like the longer and longer code you've been around or your code base has existed, the harder and harder this is going to be. Which is why employing a tool to get a handle on it is so critical. It's sometimes really, really hard to tell how widespread your problem is. If your engineers basically say, we don't want to touch this legacy system, and we need to build something next to it because we don't want to touch it and we don't understand how it works, you have a problem. If you don't have a good communication between teams, your engineering teams are siloed and there isn't that communication process happening, you have a problem. So just looking for those signs of like how collaborative, how information gets disseminated across your organization. You have a lot of redundancy where you have products or code or just components that do the same thing as each other because one engineer from one team didn't consult with another, you have a problem. And so those are just some markers to go and try to figure it out. But it's almost guaranteed that most software companies have some remnants of that.
And following up on that, how long does a fix take?
I mean, honestly, it really just depends on, I'm giving the typical engineer answer, but it just depends on how big and complicated your code base is. It depends on how many products you have. It depends on how many repos you have. It depends on if you have enough engineering talent to go in and fix it. And sometimes this is not really a problem until it's a problem. Until you get breached or until you need to go and Bitcoin miners are hacking to your server, whatever it is, right? There are still always holes, and so it could take a quarter, if everybody kind of swarmed to do it, it could take years if you did it one file at a time.
We just got a question in from one of our attendees. Are current employment agreements adequate to prevent non-disclosure of proprietary code information when an employee leaves their company?
That's an excellent question. So here's the thing. Technically, it will help, like, to not have the exact line, like the exact creation of your like proprietary system going to another company. But the way that we as engineers become senior, right? The way the thing that we get evaluated on is being able to hold larger and larger code bases in our head. It is like the way that we get, acclamations is seeing more and more code, seeing more and more variety of how different systems are architected, how different kinds of challenges that we've had to solve for, different kinds of bugs that we've had to fix. And so it's going to be really hard to not have an engineer use what they've learned at another company. Those two things go hand in hand.
All right. Does code facilitate or inhibit investigating a breach? And as an example, the log retention periods for many online services such as Microsoft 365 are very limited. That makes it difficult to investigate a breach since there may be little, if any, trail. Any thoughts about that?
Well, if you've already been breached, it's too late.
Okay.
If your user's information, or if you're at like it's already too late.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about that?
I think that something like this is not gonna help with the audit trail of trying to figure it out, because as we're coding, as we're writing code, we need to be able to take our systems and how they work into account as they're writing code and fix problems before they're a problem.
Okay. How does the programming treat collected data? California law restricts the ability of companies to use automated decision-making, so that should be monitored. Any thoughts about that?
I don't think that really applies here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that with us, with CodeC, what we do is we allow for developers to keep their code on premise, right? So it doesn't really apply here.
Okay.
That I know of. I could learn something, maybe, but not to my knowledge.
It was a question from one of our attendees. All right, next. If you use a third party to handle data, what are their security and privacy protocols? Are they compliant with applicable laws like CCPA, GDPR, New York Shield, etc.?
So if I understand the question correctly, it's if your code base uses a third-party system?
Yes.
Okay. So if your code base uses a third-party system, you have to go and talk to that third party about how they handle their data, and then they would be the ultimate holders of how they handle it and if they're compliant with all the laws. There's no way for us to be able to know that. But if you're talking about, how does CodeC handle that? We allow all of the developers to run CodeC on-prem in their local development environments. So all of that can stay for the companies that we work with that want that information to stay on-prem, totally fine. There are some companies that want us to run a SaaS solution, so we will have that available for them. But it just really, really depends.
Okay. Is the language for the code widely used or well known? If there is a breakdown in the code, you need to be able to resolve the problems, and you need to find someone who is knowledgeable about the code language in order to make the fixes? Yes. Yeah.
So like at your company, you'll need developers who obviously know the language that you're writing in, but you can hire generalists. Each coding language has their own kind of quirks.
Right.
And so if you've hired generalists who know a bunch of different languages, it might take, developers a little bit to understand, like, for JavaScript, there's very hairy language with very unique properties, I would say. It does help to make sure that your engineers know the language. But most, good engineers can flip-flop on languages pretty easily, as long as they, take the time to understand it. And most developers will.
Okay. Was the program built using privacy by design and security by design? And now I'm talking about CodeC. In other words, was that a basic specification for your code, your development?
Yeah, so we started thinking about what's the fastest way that we could help solve this problem, and so we took a lot of the privacy precautions by just allowing there to be an on-prem solution kind of out of the gate. We run in development mode at first. We have that ability. So again, like, you're not touching any production data. You're not touching anything that can be hacked into. It's just on your development servers. And so for us, we didn't initially, we did take that into account because the first version allows, all developers to just use it locally. And we bypass a lot of the risk.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question.
Sure.
How did you decide to visualize data and execution of running programs instead of static visualizations like the graphs you discussed? What was the product process there? And that's from Ryan.
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I I think that for me, I did a lot of research into how to understand code. I am by nature a very visual person, and for me, the boxes and lines were never helpful as I learned to code and as I learned to think about different things. And so what I really thought about was how to, what is all of the information that I need to truly understand how something works. And then I was inspired by a talk by Brett Victor called Inventing on Principle. And he does this amazing video from 2012 that I highly recommend that anybody watch because it's absolutely amazing. That really inspired me. I know that a lot of other companies have been inspired by that presentation as well. Webflow is one of them that comes to mind. And basically what Brett Victor says is we hold a lot of this information in our heads, but the computer knows. I might get the quote wrong because off the top of my head, but the computer knows exactly how our code works. So why is it that humans have to play computer? Why doesn't the computer just, show us? And I heard that, and I think I broke down in tears because I thought that he was exactly right. And so why doesn't the computer just show us how code works? Why are we simulating how a computer works in our heads? And that was really the moment that I thought, oh my gosh, what if we could visualize code? What if we could visualize it in a way that actually helps people understand it? And what if we could visualize how not just like the lowest level of code works, or not just the highest level, but every level in between? And we worked really hard with a number of designers to patent how our visualization works, and how it displays it, because no one has the visuals that we do. It's all unique to bring our education backgrounds to, learning how to code or learning how these large system works.
Would you repeat the talk that inspired you so much?
Yeah, it's called Inventing on Principle.
Inventing on Principle. Cool. I'm guessing we're all going to go watch that. Here's another audience question, Shanea. Are there proactive actions a company can take to protect their code after an employee leaves, such as changing system access passwords, anything like that?
Yes, you should do that. That's something you should do. And making sure that you have a robust IT, organization to make sure that things are, locked down if necessary. But again, particularly with, engineers, their whole job, unless they have a tool like CodeC or SourceGraph, is to hold these things in their heads, right?
Right.
It just is. You can't lock someone's brain out, essentially. That's just the nature of development. But what you can do is you can use something like a CodeC, and I don't want to keep harping on that because this is about risk in your organization, but you can use something like that to make sure that the information is disseminated to the rest of your organization in the most scalable way possible, so that the rest of your organization can scalably keep that information into their heads.
Right. And Larry, thank you for that question and the one earlier. Shanea, we've covered a lot of ground. Mm-hmm. What have I missed in questions that you get asked that you think our audience might find helpful and relevant?
Yeah. So I think one thing is that you should probably check in with your engineers. As an organization, check in to see how frustrated they are with your code base. Check in to see how hard it is to get code out the door. Understand what kinds of barriers they have, like truly deeply understand what kind of barriers they have to make a new feature, or how many people do they need to talk to, or how many approvals do you have, or how many, like what your CI/CD pipeline is. Just really try to understand what they're up against to get that feature out the door. And try to think about a way to provide them with support, provide them with people, provide them with whatever you need, so to make their lives easier. Because at the core of software company, your product is created by and actually generated by engineers. And so whatever tool they need to be more successful and get more code out the door, and not deal with a lot of roadblocks, is ultimately good for your business. Because unless a feature is done and unless a feature is protected, you're not capitalizing on that business value. And so making sure that developers have what they need and that they're happy so that they stay at your organization is also the flip side of this, right? What do they need culture-wise? What do they need? How much friction do you have between departments, right? To make sure that they stay and that they're happy. Wanting to make developers' lives easier is a passion of mine, but it also is really good business practice as well.
Yeah. Any other comments that occurred to you that will be helpful for our audience?
Yeah, I think that our world is changing, right? And making sure that you culturally make sure that you are, culturally thinking about the things as an organization that you say, making sure that you have a diverse team, make sure that you have all of the things required to be able to have a good brand, because engineers, particularly really good ones, can essentially go anywhere. There's a lack of engineering talent, as we all know. Even Google doesn't have enough resources to ship all the code that they want to ship, which seems crazy, but they don't. Thinking about how you present as an organization, making sure that you have diversity of race, gender, but just a diversity of thoughts, particularly on your engineering team, is also something, if you haven't thought about it or you haven't been able to invest in it, definitely do that, because it ultimately helps your team, helps your engineering culture, and ultimately that translates into being able to make a sustainable company in 2021.
Yeah. Thank you for those additional comments. So I understand that one of the ways you've helped maintain your clarity, sanity during these pandemic times is that you've become a whiz at inventing cocktails. So please share with us an appropriate pandemic cocktail that we should consider.
Absolutely. I think the one that comes top of mind, there's a Georgia peach that I really like that has vodka and peach schnapps and I think lemonade, and then a little bit of maraschino cherries, and you just like throw a little bit of maraschino cherry juice in it just to kind of top it all off. But it's definitely one of my favorite easy cocktail drinks, that because we don't make bread. We don't have a bread maker, so cocktails are our quarantine hobby of choice.
Got it. And I understand that you're making headway on your treadmill. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, I actually had a run injury, and it's been, really hard to get back to running. But I ended up, during the pandemic, found a very safe physical therapy office that allowed me. They had a lot of availability, go figure. So I ended up going to a lot of physical therapy to make sure that my knee and hip was okay. And then we ended up getting a treadmill. So I'm up to running 3 miles again on the treadmill. And maybe at the end of 2021, I'll get back to running half marathons again.
Good luck, and I hope that is indeed the case.
Me too.
And thank you for sharing those glimpses of your life with us. I'm going to take back the picture just for a few moments.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Hi there again. Shanea, I want to thank you for generously sharing your time and expertise to address these critical cybersecurity, privacy, and business risk issues alongside viable, and I will add brilliant in my mind, solutions. Shanea's slides, along with a summary and a recording link to this session, will be posted on the LINKCO website. The recording will be posted on my YouTube channel. At the end of the webinar, please take a minute to fill out the survey. This will help us evaluate and improve our series going forward. And thank you. Your feedback is appreciated. LINKCO Executive Search provides elite companies with top CXOs and upper management nationwide using a proprietary step-by-step process for both clients and candidates. We are on 24/7, 365. When you need help, please call upon us. And please stay tuned to the website as well as my LINKCO posts for additional topics and speakers. And do let me know what topics would be of use to your business sector. Have a good morning, afternoon, and evening, and stay safe. And thank you again.